Hi, I'm Jessica Rector, your host and founder of This Man Thing, where we help men go bolder, think bigger, and be better to gain more freedom, confidence, and success. You can find us at thismanthing.com. You can also join our free Facebook group at thismanthing.com/groups, where men are having real conversations and building much needed community support and camaraderie with other men. My guest today is Michael Kasdan, and he is currently the Director of Special Projects for the Good Men Project. He is a father of two who lives in Maplewood, New Jersey. Mike's day job is intellectual property lawyer, but his interests and avocations are numerous. Mike is passionate about education, mental health, social justice, entrepreneurship, and technology. Please help me give a warm welcome to Michael. Woo! Thanks for joining me today, Michael. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jessica. My pleasure.
Yay. So tell us a little bit about you and in your passions. There's lots of things you're passionate about. So give us a little glimpse into those and how you got started on those.
Sure. So I actually came to the Good Men Project in kind of a random way. I've always kind of enjoyed writing, but never really did it consistently. And I've always enjoyed sports. And when I was my kids played Little League baseball. I coached Little League. I played pickup basketball. And I came to the Good Men Project in kind of a random way. First I connected because they had a haiku contest about masculinity. Mm-hmm. I figured that I could, bang out. It was like less than 20 syllables, so it didn't take up a lot of time. And they ran my piece, and I was really pleased. And the editor of their poetry section was this really great guy. And I ended up connecting to the CEO. And when I spoke with her, she said, "Hey, we have this sports section that's kind of dormant, and it would be a really easy lift. And if you want to write about sports issues," I had things to say because I was coaching Little League and, experiencing that whole microcosm of life of dealing with parents and children and leadership. And I was also thinking a lot about male friendship through the pickup basketball thing. And I thought sports would be a really cool platform to kind of talk about those issues. So I joined. They already had two editors. She promised me it was an easy lift. And within 2 weeks, they both kind of disappeared, and I became the senior sports editor at the Good Men Project. But my first real serious piece with them related to mental health. And we can get into it, but I sort of bottomed out and had a really difficult battle with depression. And after I came out of it, I wrote about it, and I shared that piece with some of my friends. And they all said, "Wow, you should really share this piece because a lot of people are going through this and it could really help a lot of people." And my first inclination was, there's no way in hell that I'm sharing this because it's so shameful. And what if someone at work saw it? So my compromise was to publish it anonymously at the Good Men Project. And that's where I really, really started my journey talking and writing about mental health, which I now do non-anonymously, obviously, since I'm here today.
Awesome. Gosh, there are so many juicy nuggets in just that beginning. So let's go back a little bit and tell us what your journey with depression looked like, how it felt, how you finally even recognized it as depression, because the things that I've read is a lot of times in, just in talking with men as well, that when they're in the midst of it, they don't necessarily sometimes recognize it as depression. So what did that part look like for you, and then kind of guide us through the journey of it?
Sure. So for me, I'd never had any issue that I was aware of with mental health or depression until I was 35 years old. And I had what I think is a pretty plain vanilla upbringing, no real juicy, interesting, weird issues with family or abuse or difficult backgrounds. I had a pretty normal upbringing, and I have to say that I didn't really have any experience with depression or mental illness in terms of dealing with it with friends or family or myself. And so I didn't really think it was a thing. I thought depression just meant that you were bummed out and you were sad, or that you couldn't deal with stress or you couldn't deal with things. And so for me, I definitely had a lot going on in terms of work stresses, but also in terms of my personal life and some difficult issues that I wasn't really processing, that I think I kind of buried. And now I recognize this after, talking that out with people and being open and writing and trying to explore it. But back then, I really just thought that I was stressed out at work. And what happened was, and I'm a pretty energetic doer, and then, like you said, I have a lot of interest, and so I'm happiest when I'm doing lots of things.
Yeah.
And what happened to me was in 2009, in the winter of 2009, early 2010, I would show up at work and I would be completely paralyzed. Like I couldn't do anything. I couldn't respond to an email. I couldn't make decisions. I started isolating, and it just, it builds on itself, because then the next day I had all the emails from the prior day that I didn't respond to, and then I had a new batch of stuff, and in both home and personal life. And I was pretty sure it was just, I was stressed out because I wasn't really talking it through with anyone. And I reached out to my sister. I have a younger sister. I'm the oldest, and I have a younger brother and a younger sister, but we're all pretty close. And, I explained what was happening, and knowing me and knowing about, my personal life and my marriage and things that were going on, she said, I'm pretty sure it's not that you're just stressed. Like, I think that you really need to speak to someone. And I resisted it. I really did. I just, because I really didn't believe it was a thing. And she actually came to my office and took me and brought me to a therapist for the first time.
So what's the difference in how it looks? How does stress show up differently than depression?
I think that stress can sometimes be a trigger to depression, and I think life circumstances, if you have, you may be, they may work together. And I'm not a doctor; I don't have it all figured out. But for me, it wasn't just stress, because there were so many signs. I withdrew. I didn't want to talk to anyone, and it was really, like, it was literal paralysis. That's the best way I can explain it. And then you become ashamed of that and you withdraw more, and it kind of builds upon itself. And the conversation that you're having in your head is not consistent with what people know about you. Your brain is telling you bad things about yourself.
So give us an example of what that looks like. What is this conversation that you're having in your head, or that you were having in your head?
Sure. So it's funny. One of the things that I wrote, and I had forgotten about this, but I moved recently, and I found this 6-page handwritten letter that I wrote, but never sent. I think I remember my sister saying, "Why don't you write it all down? You process things well when you write them." And it was a letter that I wrote to myself while I was in the middle of a month or 6-week, like, really acute depression. And I ended up publishing it with the Good Men Project, and I can share that link later. But reading it a few months ago, I think it really reflects what it feels like to be inside that. And I described it when I spoke, and when I've written about it, as kind of like an autoimmune disease of the mind. Like, all of the things, all the tools that we rely on normally to get you through the day, your brain and your heart and your connections and your network and your ability to just, work through things. It's like everything's kind of turned against you. So you withdraw from your network, and instead of, sending you on the path to solutions, you're feeling bad about yourself, and you're feeling shame, and you're saying, well, why didn't I do this? Why can't I respond to this? What's wrong with me? There's something wrong with me. And it just creates extreme isolation. And in me, I don't think it manifests in everyone the same, but for me, it was this feeling of just being of standing on the precipice, and every decision seemed wrong. And so I just did nothing. And then it just avalanches. That's what it feels like, or felt like to me.
So, because there's times in my life that I don't make a decision because I'm scared to make the wrong decision. So I just stay in what I call stuckness. What's the difference between that and what you're talking about? Because like logically, it sounds the same. Like, I'm scared. You're scared to make a decision, so you just say, what's the difference between that and just feeling stuck?
Yeah, I think it's a difference in degree.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's natural for all human beings to have some level of procrastination and maybe not feeling confident about something or feeling stressed. But when I'm depressed, like, it takes over to the extent that you can't do anything. I think normally you can be stuck and you can go have coffee with your friend and say, oh, I'm stuck on this thing, help me figure this out. And then you can get a little kick in the pants and you can go do it. This was different in kind. And so I think that's...
So I want you to give me a real example of what a day in the life of depression looked like for you, because there's going to be guys listening that don't want that label, right? They don't want the label of quote unquote being a man who is depressed. So they're going to say, that's not me. And when in fact, that may actually be them. So what did a day in the life at, varying degrees, so pick whatever degree you want, whether it was the beginning, the middle, the depths of it, and tell us what a day looked like for you, what you weren't able to do, and then what you chose to do instead of, answering emails like you had said earlier.
So, yeah, I think the point you make about labels is a really good one, and it's important. And people I've spoken to who are in the field and, more expert than I am and have thought about it a lot, the word mental illness or depression, like, there's a stigma associated with that, which I understand. And I think the construct I like to use to understand it and explain it is that we all have, just like we have our health, our physical health, we all have mental health. And there's a range of where you are on that spectrum of being, mentally healthy or physically healthy. And sometimes you get sick. And some people get very sick, and some people get a little sick, and some people get sick sometimes. So I think that idea of labeling and kind of overcoming that is something we really have to work really hard in our culture. And I think for men, particularly when the message is be tough, man up, just push through it, be the provider. There's a lot of pressure on men that way. It's in a way that I think makes it even more difficult to deal with. But getting back to your question of a day in the life, I would say, I went through a period of years where I was experiencing depression. And for me, and I think everyone experiences it differently, for me, it would come and last for like 4 weeks or 5 weeks or 6 weeks. And even when I saw it coming, the thing that was so difficult for me was, you would think that after you've been through it once and you can see what's happening, you'd be able to just, go the other way or make a decision that changes that. And so for me, in the beginning, I, had internal feelings of, worthlessness, not being able to figure something out. And I mean, I would, I live in a suburb of New York, and as it got worse, and I take the train in, and then I walk to work, like on my train, I would go wait for the train, and I would have thoughts about, well, what if I just walked in front of this train right now, every morning? And, and I was like, oh, well, there's all these people here, and then, oh, I just missed it. And then you get into New York, and on my 20-minute walk between Penn Station and the office, you're looking up to see, like, well, where can I jump off of? Like, it got very bad in terms of actually having suicidal thoughts.
What stopped you from taking action on any of those things?
I'll tell you in a second, but in terms of, the day-to-day, I would come to work and I would get in and I would have tasks come in and emails come in, and I would procrastinate, and then had no urge to, go out and hang out with friends or have a beer, and, just sort of felt very isolated. And those were my days. And then you come back the next day and it would be worse, and the next day would be worse. And for me, I'm very lucky. I had a very supportive family. It was difficult for my family because they'd never been through anything like that. My dad said, well, why is this happening? I don't get it. He didn't have experience with mental health. But what my family did to help me was almost like intervention, like in that they saw stress as a trigger for it. And they said, okay, well, you're procrastinating, you're not getting things done. We have to take tasks away from you. So, and it was embarrassing, but it was also important. So they were like, you're not coaching Little League Baseball anymore. You don't have to send those 65 emails to parents and organize all that. And we're going to tell your coaches, guess what? Mike's not doing it anymore. You're doing it. And when I was paralyzed, my sister said, give me your email password. I'm going to go in and I'm going to take things off your plate. And I was lucky enough to work with my father. We're both lawyers and we worked at the same law firm. And he literally took things off of my plate. Wow. And at my worst, I actually took a few weeks leave of absence for my job. And then returned. But what stopped me from doing something horrible? I mean, there were people that were reaching out to me every day, and even though it didn't feel very good, and I felt like I didn't really have much to say, there were people reminding me about my children and telling me that I mattered. You matter is a very powerful, simple thing. And looking back, I recognize it's a huge burden on people around you. It was a huge burden on my family, on my then wife, and my kids were younger, so back then I didn't really speak openly about it. Yeah. Now I do a little bit more. I don't tell them about the really the suicidal thoughts, but when I go to see a therapist, I don't say, "Oh, I'm going to a meeting." I say I'm going to a therapist because it's important to talk to, and so I'm trying to instill that in my kids. But it is a huge burden on people that are dealing with it, and I think so many people, if you haven't experienced it yourself, at least someone that's going through it. And I think people that consistently reached out to me and were there for me, even when it felt like not a lot, and I'm sure it was very frustrating for them because I wasn't very responsive, it was really important.
So when you were talking about your family helping you, taking tasks off, taking them on, what's the difference between helping someone who is going through depression, dealing with depression, and enabling them?
Yeah. So my family is like one of those very involved families, which is not always, not everyone loves that. But look, I think, I don't know if you can enable depression, but I think what I'll take your question to mean is, you do have to, I think, say, and I think it's hard, loved ones want to just help. So my dad's inclination was, I can just help. I can do these things and maybe it'll make Mike better. And, others around me have that similar inclination. But I think one important thing that people have to realize, and luckily my sister realized this very early, was like, you need to bring in experts. So it wasn't just people sending emails from you. Like I went and I talked to a therapist and I did uncover things that were really buried. And I think depression, yes, it absolutely has a chemical aspect, but it's also anger turned inward. It's unexpressed anger. And so, dealing with, like, actually going to professionals and I've been on different, I'm not on any medication now. And if I'm being honest, I don't love the idea of being on some medication for the rest of your life and messing with my body's chemicals. But there were times when my therapist, and so I prefer talk therapy, but I think that pharmaceutical, they do have a role in certain points. And at certain points, it was so acute that I was really unable to talk. And so my therapist was saying, well, until we get you to a baseline, like, medically and chemically, like, we can't really do this. So, seeing someone who can prescribe something, and I finally, and it's frustrating because it's really kind of trial and error. And I had like an allergic reaction to something. Wow. And, they don't have fun side effects. Like, the side effects are never like weight loss and awesomeness. It's always like, the opposite, for some reason. I'm sure they're still working on that, but dealing with that, and you feel like, I'm trying to manage my life. I've been crappy at work. I'm supposed to spend my time at work, and then you have to go to the doctor and you have to go to the therapist, and so all that feels invasive. But I think families recognizing the boundaries of what they can do. They can be loving and they can be supportive and they can be there and they can help manage day-to-day things. But I think they also have to realize that this is something that you have to defer to experts in, medical experts and psychological experts. And I think urging people to get that kind of help, which is sometimes, especially for men, to be like, I need help. I want to talk about my feelings. It all feels very counter to, your normal day-to-day kind of stuff.
Well, what I meant by enabling was, you totally answered it, was that I think that family can come in and help and take some of those tasks off. But along with that, the person going through depression needs to seek help. What I meant by enabling is that if the family did all that, but didn't support, encourage, nudge the person to get help, that's kind of enabling. Like, let me just take all of this off your plate, but yet you keep being you, like you keep being depressed, but not doing anything about it. Right. So what I find a lot of times is that people think they're helping, but sometimes they're actually enabling it. But I think the key is also, like you mentioned, bringing in experts and getting help, because it's not something that men can do alone and they shouldn't have to do alone. Like, it's not something that you just snap out of and you wake up one day and you're like, yay, okay, now I'm good, thumbs up, like everything's great now. And so what is kind of the key factor that you think in getting help, going through the process to get through depression into the other side? It's getting help, but there has to be something that happens in the process of getting help, or what was kind of like an aha or a light bulb that you're like, okay, now I can start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I can see the progress. I'm starting to come out of it.
Yeah. So for me, the takeaway, the aha moment, it was a kind of a way of thinking about it, which is going from a thing that I was hiding and ashamed of and would never talk to anyone, and would never talk to anyone at work about, because it's, you don't talk about that, because it just shows that you're weak and shameful and you can't handle your shit. Can I say that? I just did. Moving from that to actually, when I started to look at it more and talk to people more, and for me, writing about it more and writing about it more openly, you start to realize, one of my favorite authors is David Foster Wallace, who's a fabulous writer and also struggled with mental health. And he has this quote where he says, you go up to anyone on the street, you walk up to them and you say, "What's wrong?" And they may say, what are you talking about? What's wrong? And if you just look at them in the eye and you say, no, really, you can tell me what's wrong. Everyone's going to have an answer, right? Something is wrong with everyone. Everyone is going through something that they're carrying inside them. And for me, the realization was, wow, like there are a lot of people dealing with things that they're not talking about, dealing with mental health problems. So when I started talking to people and writing about it, and people would see my writing and send me a message and say, wow, you just expressed exactly what I was feeling, or what my husband was feeling, or what my brother was feeling. And, I even got to the point where I talked to clients about this, like people who are stressed out. I'm a lawyer, like it happens. I'm sure there's a large percentage of lawyers that go through periods of depression. And having that, and seeing that it's not this shameful thing that you cover up, that actually if you open up about it, like people connect to it, because either someone's gone through it or know someone who has gone through it. Mm-hmm. And we have this cultural blockade of stigma. But, I remember the day, like I talked to this client and we connected about mental health writing. And before I was kind of being like, I was writing about this stuff on the Goodman Project, and I was praying no one would actually see it who I was with, because they would see that I was flawed. But I realized that it's not that I'm flawed, it's just that I'm human, and it's a point of connection and strength. And one thing that I've done is to try and grow that. So at the Goodman Project, I've gone from writing about this anonymously to leading a group. We call them social interest groups. And I just led one on men's mental health with 25 people in it. And we had calls once a week and communicated by email and on Facebook, in between that. And part of that is community and sharing, but part of it is a lot of people who've realized that dealing with the stigma is something that has to be overcome, and trying to be creative about how we do that. And I think one way we do that is by sharing our stories. And so one thing we did, and we're going to roll it out. Actually, we're going to roll it out in a public service announcement video, which I'll share with you. And we chose the hashtag Not Weak, Just Human, and we just got 8 of us, and we're just regular guys. We're fathers, we're sons, we're brothers, we're lawyers, we're workers, we're writers, we're whatever. We're just everyone. Yeah. We're black, we're white, we're gay, we're straight. We have this total cross section of people, and we each made a little 30-second video just saying, hey, this is who I am. This is what I'm dealing with and have dealt with, and this is kind of one tip I might have, and then closing with saying, I'm not weak, just human. And I'm going to share that. And yeah, so and you tell your story, because I think if we all tell our stories, if we're not all walking around scared of what other people are going to think, it's really, really empowering, and it's actually a pathway to actually dealing with mental health itself. It's really
and it's completely liberating. I mean, in my book, Breaking the Silence, Taking the Out of Shame, that's what it's about. It's about, when we all sit there, we all walk around with this shame that we're so scared to talk about and we're so scared to acknowledge, but yet we all have it. And yet what that does is we just bottle it up and push it down because we're so scared of what other people are going to say, think, or do. But yet when we actually talk about it, that's when we start to connect with people. That's when other people say, oh my gosh, you're just like me. Guess what? I have felt the same way, or I've been through the same thing, or my family is just as dysfunctional as yours, or whatever the case is. But yet we try so hard to not talk about it, which is the prime reason why I love talking about the people that talking about the things that people hate talking about it, because I feel that that's when we liberate ourselves, right? That's when we free ourselves. So shame, fears, vulnerability, mental health, depression, all the suicide, all those things that are taboo that have such a huge stigma. It's like, but what happens when we give ourselves permission to talk about it? I mean, it frees us from these chains that are binding us every single day and allows us to just say, hey, we're human just like you. I get it. Like, I've been there. I understand the pain and the hurt and the struggles and the issues. But when we're trying so hard to hide those, we also become a person who we're really not, right? I mean, just in you saying that you were writing about mental health anonymously to being all out writing about it with your name, right, attached to it, that in itself is liberating, because you're all out. You're like, hey, this is me. If you like me, great. If you don't, great. Initially, it's scary, right? Initially, it's like, oh my gosh, what are people going to say? But then you take that, you eradicate that, because then when you put your name to it, in essence, it doesn't matter. Like, they're going to resonate with you. They're going to connect with you. And if they don't, then that's not your issue. That's theirs, right? And it's giving yourself a stronger voice when you attach your name to it, right? And you say you matter, right? Your story matters. Your viewpoint matters. Your opinion matters. What you've been through matters to the world. And I think that there's power just in doing that.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And yeah, I mean, I've connected with amazing people in mental health. Like, one of my heroes and icons, Dr. Andrew Solomon, who's written Pulitzer awarded books on mental health. I sought him out and interviewed him, and we sat down and talked about this stuff. And I mean, folks, there's an organization called Stigma Fighters that's saying, share your stories. And we did a joint project with them in the Good Men Project, focused on men, saying, just, send us your stories and let's tell your stories. And it is really empowering and really liberating. And I think it really is. It's funny. I was asked kind of randomly to give a keynote address for a group of in-house lawyers recently, a few months ago. And I decided not to talk about a legal topic, but to more talk about sort of bring yourself to work day, and how if we bring our real selves to what we do every day, it's kind of better. And I had a slide where I talked about my depression. And, Andrew Solomon has a pretty famous TED Talk, and he's written about it. And he has some line about, learning to love your depression. And my reaction to that line was always like, well, let's not get carried away with it here. You can deal with it, but loving it's like a whole different thing. But I think I do know what he means. He means that we all have to be whole people. We have darkness and we have light and we have struggles and we have emphases. And when you're authentic about who you are, it's just, to me, it's a better way of living, and both personally and for our culture as a whole. So that's kind of been what I've learned kind of on this journey.
And it's so bold to speak about that in front of your peers. Lawyers have, which I'm sure one of the highest suicide rates in any profession. So it's very bold for you and very brave for you to speak about that. And guess what? Very much needed for you to speak about that in front of not only other lawyers, but to other men, because you're right. There's this stigma associated with depression that, men have to be big and strong and tough, and they can fix their own problems. They have their own solutions. They don't need help. And when something like this hits them, I don't know a lot of times that they recognize it in the moment. I've talked to several guys that say, looking back, that's what it was, but I didn't recognize it as that in the moment. And going back to label, I think because it has to do with the label and the stigma associated with the label. So what can we do to help society and help ourselves to move past that label? And if, there are men listening that resonate with that, to recognize, that label doesn't define them, and to seek help for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the more people tell their stories, and not just like people like me, right? I'm just a guy, but people like Bruce Springsteen sharing his story, or Kid Cudi, or athletes, entertainers. I mean, I think if you look at any sort of social issue, and I consider this to be one of them, people want to feel, if you're a black kid in school and you see a black teacher, you're like, oh, I can do that.
Yeah.
And I think it's not a perfect analogy, but I think the more you see, this is normal. It is normal. People go through this. So it's not some weird thing that you have to hide and power through. It's just normal. And I think dealing with it authentically and with empathy towards other people is a strength. It is toughness.
Yes.
And I think if you self-isolate and say, I'm just going to do this myself and I'm not going to get help, and that's kind of, in me, that's sort of giving in to the disease. And so I think there are different models of what it means to be strong, and being strong isn't always, the maybe, misideal of, going out there in your truck by yourself and just crashing across the river and falling through. There is strength in seeking help, and there is strength in building empathy. And I think that's kind of what I've learned going through.
And there's strength in sharing your story, right? There's a lot of strength in sharing your story. So tell us one thing that if a man is maybe on the verge of recognizing that this could be them, what's the first thing that you'd suggest, the one thing you'd suggest for them to do to heal and to get better?
I mean, I would just say, to me, the paralysis and isolation is such a powerful thing, that I think the most important step is really to reach out for help, and whether it's family or a friend, and it doesn't have to be dramatic, but I mean, I think if you just let someone who cares for you know, hey, I'm having a really hard time with this. I don't feel right. This is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm experiencing. Being less alone with it. Yeah. And you might not be able yourself to see it or even know to get help or be strong enough to get help. But I think people who care for you, when you go to someone, will be empowered to help you and help you help yourself. So to me, that was the most important thing for me. And I didn't do anything. I sat there in my office with the door closed, wasting away. And I was lucky that my sister physically walked in and took me by my arm and said, no, we're doing this, and I don't care what you think. Right. That was very lucky. But I think bring someone in who cares, so you're not alone, who knows to check in with you, who can get help if need be, I think is a really, really important step.
So very, very quickly, tell me some clear signs or some red flags or something that men can look for, that if this is going on, it may be depression or it is depression. What are some things that they can identify?
So social isolation, procrastination, not getting joy out of the things that used to bring you joy. Like I used to play basketball every Sunday, Wednesday, but I was depressed. I was like, I don't really feel like doing that. I'm just going to sit here. So those are some of the signs for me. I think those are fairly universal, and sort of red flags to look out for. And like you said, it's complicated, right? Sometimes you don't get joy because you had a bad day and it's raining. But I think persistence of those things and just sort of checking in with yourself on those three things is something to look out for.
And if it goes over a certain period of time or longer than a day, longer than a week, like if it's consistently is that kind of a flag as well, or a sign?
Yeah, no, for sure. Like I said, you could just be having a bad day, and I don't know that there's any magic time.
Yeah.
I think, being self-aware enough to check in with yourself and say, this isn't me. This doesn't feel right. I'm not being social. I'm not doing anything. Nothing's really bringing me happiness. I'm having bad thoughts about myself. Those types of things, being honest and recognizing those happening over a period of time, definitely I would seek out help and sort of open up to someone.
So how can people find out more about you, or how can they reach you?
So lots of different ways. So if you search for my name, Michael Kasdan, and the Good Men Project, you can find my profile, my author page there with all the various writings. I'm at Facebook, so you can find me on Facebook. I play on Facebook a lot. I'm on Twitter at Michael Kasdan, MichaelKasdan. And I think that's probably plenty, right?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much for being here, Michael. Loved having this conversation with you. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast today. Again, I'm Jessica Rector, founder and host of This Man Thing, where we help men go bolder, think bigger, and be better. Feel free to connect with me. You can reach out to me at jessica@thismanthing.com, or you can also go on Facebook and join our free Facebook group at thismanthing.com/groups, where men are having real conversations and building much needed community support and camaraderie with other men, and they're gaining more freedom, confidence, and success. Until next time, have a wonderful, fabulous day. Thanks so much for being here. Bye-bye.